Is India looking at possibly hardening its stance on the Russia-Ukraine conflict? The question has come about after Ambassador Tirumurti's comments in the United Nations last evening, India time, where India has joined the demand for an independent probe into the atrocities committed in Bucha in Ukraine. Now, the Ukrainians say that these are war crimes, that genocide was committed by Russian army while they were exiting Bucha and withdrawing from there. And truly, the descriptions, the pictures is nothing short of horrific. It is just unimaginable that human beings have inflicted such horror on civilians. There are reports of piles of charred bodies on the streets of this region in Ukraine. The Russians are denying this. They're in fact saying that some of these claims are completely forged. In the midst of this, India is saying, as we have always done, that we're against violence, but this time around we're supporting the call for an independent probe. Meanwhile, India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar spoke about the issue in Parliament as well, spoke about India's stance on the war and condemned the Bucha killings, said India also supports the calls for an independent investigation. He, however, reiterated India's neutral stance, saying national interest will remain a priority. The question we're asking today is that can India continue its stance after what has happened in Bucha? And to be honest, the question is not just for India, because NATO nations, European Union nations are very vocal in condemning Russia, but they continue to buy gas from them. Should they continue to do so after what is happening in Bucha? Can these double standards which we're seeing from European nations also continue? Before we get to that conversation, let me first play out for you what the minister said today.
We are, first and foremost, strongly against the conflict. We believe that no solution can be arrived at by shedding blood and at the cost of innocent lives. In this day and age, dialogue and diplomacy are the right answers to any disputes, and this should bear in mind that the contemporary global order has been built on the UN Charter, on respect for international law, and for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states. If India has chosen a side, it is the side of peace. Many honorable members brought up the incident, the happenings in Bucha, and I want to say that we are deeply disturbed by the reports. We strongly condemn the killings which have taken place there. This is an extremely serious matter, and we support the call for an independent investigation.
Nalin Surie, former High Commissioner to UK and former Ambassador to China and Poland, with us on the show. Vishnu Prakash, former Ambassador to Canada and South Korea, with us on the show. And Michael Kugelman, Senior Associate for South Asia Woodrow Wilson Center in DC, also joining us on the show this evening. Thank you to all of you for speaking with us. Ambassador Surie, just, the basic question we've started with, and of course, India's maintained a neutral stance so far. We're not the only nation who has. There is a large agreement that India has to look after its priorities. If we have to import more Russian crude at cheap prices, then why not? The Europeans are still importing gas. But has Bucha changed things? Because this is horror which is unimaginable. Can business as usual still continue?
Well, I think the government of India has made its position on what happened in Bucha very clearly. It's been strongly condemned both by the External Affairs Minister in Parliament and also by our permanent representative in the UN Security Council, of which we are a current non-permanent member. I think this has not a question of neutrality. It's a question of taking a principled position on something which should not have happened. It does not mean that the rest of our positions have changed or have been diluted. I think we have always taken a very consistent position on this issue, and I think that position remains consistent. Supporting a call for an investigation is something which we would have gone along with under any circumstances in a case like this. So, I think we have, as you notice, consistently been taking the position that territorial integrity is of the essence. So, if that was not a criticism, then what is a criticism? So I don't think India's position has changed, but obviously during the course of a conflict of this nature, which should not have happened in the first place, if something horrific as what happened in Bucha occurs, we will take a principled position.
Yep.
So I think I won't see this as a fundamental change in India's position, or that we are changing sides. No, we have not changed sides at all. Our positions remains consistent. We are on the side of what the principles of the UN Charter contain, and on the two critical principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Having said that, Ambassador Prakash, the fact is that India has chosen to abstain from a number of resolutions which were moved in the UN so far. And let me come to you on this. Of course, we've not flip-flopped or changed sides. We were never on anyone's side. We were neutral through this. But what is the significance of the statement that we have put out in the UN last evening? That question for Ambassador Prakash.
Tamanna, good evening. I would beg to differ on characterizing India's position as neutral or business as usual. It is anything but neutral. There is nothing which is business as usual. What we have taken is a principled stance, an independent stance. We have said what needs to be said. We have not followed the Western dictation because we also understand the Queen's language. Now, look at the import of our remarks. Even today, Dr. Jaishankar has said in the parliament that spilling innocent blood, spilling blood of innocent lives is not the solution. All that we have done is not call President Putin names or condemn it upfront, because calling him names, calling him a butcher, calling him a killer or a war criminal is only going to harden positions. It's not a solution. Sanctions are not a solution. So the reason we abstain is that there is always language in the statement which is very harsh, and we find that does not help. The only way forward is good old diplomatic negotiations, away from the media glare, quiet, without name calling. But it is very, very clear that our position has been modulated or has changed according to circumstances, because Bucha killing cannot be justified. It is a crime. It is a crime. It's a crime against humanity. But, Tamanna, there is a fog of war. And there is a parallel misinformation campaign going on. There are two narratives. We hear only one narrative. So all we are saying is that an independent inquiry should be held, Tamanna.
So you're right about the two parallel narratives, because the Russians are saying that none of this has happened. Whatever's happened, it wasn't us, and all of this is fake. It's sort of been propped up. Michael, what's your take? Because this has been the problem from day one. Two parallel narratives going along, very harsh rhetoric coming in from the United States as well, which is leaving little to no room for dialogue or negotiation. And do you think that has, in a sense, dimmed the possibility of a quick outcome?
Well, certainly there's been an information war between Russia and the West for quite some time, going back to the weeks leading up to the invasion. But I think as things have played out in Ukraine over the last few weeks, as this horrible war has played out, I think that it's indisputable. There's unassailable evidence, quite frankly, of Russian war atrocities, including this most recent report in Bucha. I don't see how it can be disputed, given that so many different sources and outlets have provided images, terrible images of civilian killings. I do think that, indeed, the rhetoric, the information war, the angry words coming from both sides, including from the Western countries in the US, I think makes it difficult to think that there could be a quick negotiated outcome. But that doesn't mean that negotiations are not the solution. They are, for sure. And one thing that I've long argued is that India, quite frankly, it would be unrealistic for the US or any other country to expect India to suddenly change its position and join the Western side. That's not realistic. What I think is more realistic is for India to step up and play the role, or try to play the role, of a third-party mediator. India is one of the few countries that has had pretty frequent conversations with both the Russian and the Ukrainian side. We know about the special relationship between India and Russia. We know that India also has a good relationship with Ukraine. And I think that the few other countries that have sought to play the role of mediator, the Turks, the French, the Israelis, others, they don't have the type of relationship with Russia that India does. I know it's controversial. I know that that India itself may feel uncomfortable about the idea of serving that role, but it could be done quietly. It does not require India to change its position. And I think that may be the best way to look for the US and other countries in the West to look at the constructive role that India could play in ways that go beyond suddenly changing its position and calling Putin names publicly, which, as Ambassador Prakash said, it would not be a very effective strategy.
Interesting thought, and I'd like to get responses all around on what Michael has just spoken about. Ambassador Surie, what do you think about this, that India can and perhaps should be playing a larger role? Because we're in that position where, we can reach out to both sides. We have distance from the actual conflict, and the morals and principles we stand for are unassailable.
Look, you can make a case for trying to offer mediation, and you can also make a case for India not mediating. I think the arguments are equally strong on both sides, essentially because this is a European issue. It's a leftover issue from the end of the Cold War. And I think the problem is that Europe and the West has normally not been very happy with any other country or region trying to make efforts to play a role in Europe or in the Western alliance system in any case. But I think if the two parties believe that India can play a role in trying to narrow their differences, and if we are asked to do it, I personally would say, why not? But I think for India to make that offer in this particular situation, whereas previous speakers have said the fog of war is so heavy and the disinformation campaigns are so strong, I think it would be very difficult for a government in Delhi to take the initiative. But on the other hand, as I said, if somebody is interested and asks us, see, we are not a party to this conflict. And we do not, through an effort towards suggesting mediation, we should not become a party to this conflict. Because ultimately, if you're a party to the conflict, you cannot be a mediator. So, this request has to come to us from the other side, and not just, frankly, from the Ukrainians and the Russians, but it has to come from the Europeans and the Americans also. Look at the constant pressure that the West is putting on India all the time to change our position.
Yes.
I mean, which side are you on? I mean, do you want help or do you not want help? Or do you just want to be told that, no, either you're with us or against us? I think the United States and the West has to please clarify what their exact narrative is. So, it's very difficult for a policymaker in Delhi to take a decision on this, and the constant refrain is, join us, join us, join us, Condemnation gets you nowhere. And, there are so many historical parallels and other similar incidents which have happened in the past that would make, angels fear, make us fear where angels fear to tread, frankly. But theoretically, yes, of course, it's possible if the two main protagonists and the West combined makes a request to India. I'm sure this will be given very serious consideration in Delhi.
The question today, though, is, and Ambassador Prakash, I saw you smiling there, so please do come in on that thought, that what does India want to stand for? Of course, national priorities come first. And like I mentioned in the introduction, that seems to be the case even for, say, a nation like Germany, who doesn't want to, harm their economy in any way, even as they condemn Bucha. So what does India stand for? Do we want to take on this larger role, or are we right now saying, let's wait and watch what happens? This does not impact us directly. And let's see what the best path is from our own point of view. Do you think that that's now a sustainable sort of line as more and more of these atrocities, and some of them with, proof that you cannot refute, come to the fore?
My reading is at variance with your characterization, Tamanna. With all due respect, there are 3 points that I would like to make. One, we do not normally like mediation. We have had a very bad experience with mediation, and we do not offer mediation. But having said that, what is effective mediation all about? Effective mediation is discreet, away from the media glare, without tom-tomming it. How, and if that is the case, how do we know that India is not using its good offices already? Reading between the lines, when the third phone call happened between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin, Prime Minister Modi urged him to have a direct communication with Zelensky. What does that mean? And normally mediation happens when sides are not talking. Here they are not only talking, but they speak the same language. The third point, which is as vital, is that the ball lies not just in the court of Moscow and Kiev, but more it lies in the court of Washington, because Washington has to take a view on whether the strategic objectives have been met, whether it is time to give a face saver to Putin, whether it's a time to press ahead. So those decisions will have to be taken, as Ambassador Surie said, by the West also. But which side are we on? Dr. Jaishankar has put it beautifully. We are on the side of peace. This war should never have happened. And for us, I don't think we are neutral, because we have a lot of skin in the game. We have a good relations with Ukraine, with Russia, with US, and we do not want this senseless war to continue. So I would say that we are very keen that it comes to a cessation as soon as possible. Tamanna.
Absolutely with you on the point that we do have skin in the game because of the good relations we have with the United States and Russia, and plus our economy is also getting impacted. I mean, the world is getting impacted in so many ways because of what's happening between Russia and Ukraine. The humanitarian crisis is one which is alarming. Michael, what is the way out, really? I mean, as the rhetoric from the West also keeps getting sharper and sharper. What are your thoughts on the point Ambassador Prakash made of providing a face saver so Putin can walk away from this and this can actually end?
Yes, I would agree with that. And I also agree that it may not be possible for this war to wind down unless there is some type of serious negotiation between the Russians and the Americans. I had said that India could play a role as an external mediator, but I think that indeed, this is a war between Russia and Ukraine, but this is also indirectly a NATO war, just because of NATO's opposition to what Russia has done in Ukraine, a country that had aspired for NATO membership. But the problem is, as we've noted, it's unlikely to expect that type of negotiation to happen, given the bad blood between the Americans and the Russians. So that's why perhaps India and other countries as well could sort of play that initial role of trying to create the pathway, create the environment for an eventual negotiation between the U.S. And Russia. But unfortunately, I think at the end of the day, the only person that can answer your question, Tamara, is Vladimir Putin himself. No one knows what he wants to do except for himself. Even Russian experts would say only Putin knows what's coming next. So none of us know. But it's been a terrible war. I certainly hope that it wraps
Michael,
up.
Michael, I just have a follow-up for you on the question of this independent inquiry. And again, it's the context of the fog of war, parallel narratives, etc. Who is this agency is going to conduct this independent inquiry that everyone will agree to? Who is now that agency with that international credibility?
I assume the question is to me. I don't know. I assume the UN would be one of the logical entities to do this. I don't know who else, but indeed, this is always the problem in these types of situations. What entity steps forward? I think the UN is the most logical. I'm not sure if there actually would be an inquiry. I imagine the Russians would not cooperate.
Exactly.
So we may never know.
Yeah. Just your thought on that very quickly, Ambassador Prakash, because at the end of the day, if we are saying that, yes, there have been unbelievable human atrocities against civilians, women, children in Bucha, the Russians say we've not done it or it hasn't really happened, then who comes and clears up that fog?
Well, that's the most difficult question, because all this was done under the cover of darkness. There are no eyewitnesses left. There is no footage. There is no nothing. But having said that, the UN I do not think is the right agency, because your UN is politicized, and one side will veto the other. It's a tough call, but I would think, just from the top of my head, if countries like Israel, Brazil, maybe India were to try and send experts to look into the matter, perhaps there could be some clarity, but it is a very tough call. And you do need expertise in forensics. You need so many other things. You need to also establish the time of death. So it's a very tough call, but that has to be done to establish what exactly happened.
And that's the least. That's the least that these innocent civilians, these victims deserve, is some clarity and some truth and some accountability. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us on The Lead Story this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.